when a landlord knocked on a man's door at 6:47 in the morning and told him he had until 9 o'clock to pack up 11 years of his life and get out, he had no idea who that man's best friend was. The man sitting on those lobby stairs was named Solomon. He was 53 years old. He had never once been late on his rent. Not once. Not in 11 years. He had receipts to prove every single payment. And none of that mattered. Because his landlord, a man named Gerald Pruitt, had found a legal way to throw him out. No warning. No real reason. Just a yellow piece of paper, a clipboard, and a guy in a gray uniform who couldn't even look Solomon in the eye. Solomon sat on those stairs with his face in his hands. He had nowhere to go. He had no plan. But he had one name in his phone. One person he could call. A person he had known for 23 years. A person who had once shown up at his door with food and no words and stayed for 2 whole days when Solomon needed him most. A person who had learned everything he knew about getting back up from the man now sitting on those stairs. So Solomon made the call. And what happened in the next 53 minutes would cost Gerald Pruitt more than he ever imagined possible. Because Gerald Pruitt had spent his whole life looking at buildings and seeing numbers. He had never once stopped to ask whose name was in the phone of the man he was throwing out. The answer was Keanu Reeves. And by the very next morning, Keanu had done something so simple, so perfectly timed, and so completely unexpected that when Gerald Pruitt finally found out what hit him, he had no words left to say. But here is what you do not know yet. And this story is not really about a building. It is not really about a landlord getting what he deserved, even though he did. It is not even really about Keanu Reeves and what his money could do in a single morning. This story is about a secret that Solomon had been carrying completely alone for 18 months. A secret so heavy it had its own drawer in his kitchen. A secret written inside an envelope taped to the inside of a cabinet with 3 words on the front that he had been reading every single day and telling himself, "Not yet." The eviction notice did not just threaten Solomon's home. It cracked open the one door he had been too afraid to open by himself. And what came through that door would change everything. In a way that had nothing to do with buildings or money or landlords at all. Stay with this video until the very end. And because the real story, the one hiding underneath everything, does not show itself until the final chapter. And when it does, you will understand why this was never really about a building in the first place. It was 6:47 in the morning on a Tuesday in October 2022. The sun had not fully risen over East Hollywood yet. The sky was still that pale purple color, the kind that makes Los Angeles look gentle and soft before the traffic starts, and the heat crawls back, and the city remembers what it actually is. On a quiet block of Kenmore Avenue, wedged between a taco stand and a dry cleaner that had been there since 1987, stood a 3-story apartment building. It was not pretty. The paint was peeling near the top floor windows in long strips that curled away from the wall, like old bark off a tree. The mailboxes in the lobby had unit numbers written in black permanent marker because someone had stolen the metal number plates years ago, and nobody had replaced them. The elevator had not worked since 2019. A handwritten sign taped to its door said, "Out of order," in letters that had faded from black to gray, as if even the sign had given up. But the building had something that most places in Los Angeles had quietly lost a long time ago. It had people who knew each other's names. On that Tuesday morning, a man named Solomon Ayers was carrying 2 large black garbage bags down the staircase when the door to the main lobby swung open. Not opened. Swung open. Hard and fast, The way doors open when the person behind them is not thinking about anyone on the other side. It had hit the wall with a flat crack and left a dark smudge on the faded beige paint. Gerald Pruitt walked in. He was wearing a short-sleeved polo shirt the color of old mustard. He had a clipboard tucked under one arm and a look on his face that certain people wear when they have already made a decision and are no longer interested in anything you might say about it. Behind him came a man in a gray uniform with the logo of a company called Pacific Coast Enforcement Services printed on his chest pocket. The man in the gray uniform did not look like he wanted to be there. He kept his eyes pointed at the floor, the way people do when they are doing something they would not choose to do if the choice were entirely theirs. Solomon stopped on the staircase, one garbage bag in each hand. He was 53 years old, and he had lived in apartment 2B for 11 years. He paid his rent on the 1st of every month, sometimes on the 31st, if the month had one. He had never once been late. He had the bank records to prove it. Gerald Pruitt looked up at him. He did not say, "Good morning." "Mr. Ayers," he said, like he was reading a name off a list. "Your lease has been terminated under California Code of Civil Procedure 1161. You have until 9 o'clock this morning to vacate the premises. If you choose not to leave voluntarily, we will remove your belongings on your behalf." Solomon looked at him. His mouth opened. Then it closed. "I paid my rent last week," he said. His voice was steady, careful. "I have the receipt right here on my phone." "That payment has been reversed and refunded to your account," Pruitt said. He held up the clipboard. There was a yellow legal paper on it covered in small typed words. "You've been served a no-fault eviction under the Ellis Act. I have decided to remove this unit from the rental market permanently." Solomon repeated the words slowly, the way a person repeats something they have heard but cannot yet make fit inside their understanding of how the world is supposed to work. "The Ellis Act," he said. "In California, the Ellis Act is a real law. It allows landlords to evict tenants if they claim they intend to stop renting out their property entirely. The law was created to protect small property owners who simply wanted out of the landlord business. But for many years, real estate investors across Los Angeles had used it for a different purpose: to push out long-term tenants paying older, lower rents, renovate the empty units, and re-rent them to new tenants at prices 2 and 3 times higher. Solomon knew about the Ellis Act. He had watched it happen to his neighbor down the hall just 11 months ago. He had helped her carry boxes to a van in the rain. "You cannot do this," Solomon said. But the fight in his voice was quiet. Because he also knew, in the deep, exhausted way that people know things they do not want to know, that in the eyes of the law, Pruitt probably could. The man in the gray uniform still stared at the floor. Solomon Ayers set both garbage bags down slowly. He sat on the stair step. He put his face in both hands. He was not crying. Not yet. He was trying to understand how 11 years of a life, 11 years of a home, of neighbors, out of knowing which stair creaked and which window let in the morning light just right, could be ended in a 2-minute conversation before the sun had even finished rising. He was 53 years old, and he was sitting on a staircase, and he was trying to figure out who in this world could help him now. And then, the way a quiet voice sometimes finds you when every louder voice has gone silent, a name came to him. Keanu. The name sat in Solomon's mind the way certain names do, not like a thought, but like a presence, like someone stepping into a room. He lifted his face from his hands. The lobby was quiet now. Pruitt was gone. The man in the gray uniform was gone. The door had swung shut behind them, and the building had returned to its early morning stillness. the distant sound of a television from somewhere upstairs, and the smell of someone's coffee drifting down through the ceiling, a pigeon shifting its weight on the outside windowsill above the broken elevator. Solomon sat on the stair for another moment. Then he reached into his pocket and found his phone. But before we get to that call, before we get to what happened in the next 53 minutes that would change everything about this story, you need to understand something first. You need to understand how a stunt coordinator from Inglewood and one of the most famous actors on Earth became the kind of friends who call each other from staircases at 6:47 in the morning. Because that kind of friendship does not happen quickly. And it does not happen easily. And it almost did not happen at all. To understand it, you have to go back to 1999. The world felt different in 1999, and the internet existed but had not yet eaten everything. People still printed directions on paper before long drives. Music came in plastic cases you could hold in your hand. And in Hollywood, movies were getting bigger and louder and more physically impossible with every passing year. That was the year The Matrix was being made, and in a small training gym on Cahuenga Boulevard in Hollywood, the kind of gym with rubber mats on the floor and fluorescent lights that buzzed slightly and a water cooler in the corner that made a loud clunk every few minutes. A 29-year-old stunt coordinator named Solomon Ayers was teaching a 34-year-old actor named Keanu Reeves how to fall. Not fall as in fail. Fall as in the physical act of dropping your entire body weight toward a hard floor and landing without destroying yourself. Solomon had been doing stunt work in Hollywood for 7 years by then. He had been hit by cars on closed sets. He had been thrown off fake building rooftops. He had been set on fire, carefully, with a special flame-retardant gel that burns without truly burning, though it still gets hot enough to make you want to use every word you know. He had broken 2 ribs, his left wrist, and a small bone in his right foot that the doctor said most people do not even know they have until it breaks. He was not famous. Nobody in stunt work is famous, even when they are the ones doing the most dangerous things that appear on screen. That is the invisible bargain of the job. But Solomon was good at it, patient and specific, in a way that good teachers always are. And he had a particular gift, one that is harder to teach than any physical skill, for helping people move through fear, for taking someone who was afraid of what their body might do and giving them a reason to trust it anyway. Keanu Reeves, by the time he walked into that gym in early 1999, was already a recognizable face. Speed, Point Break, Bram Stoker's Dracula. He was known, but he was not yet the kind of famous that follows a person into every room they enter for the rest of their life. That version of famous was still a few months away, sitting on the other side of a film that would change both of their lives in entirely different ways. The Matrix required Keanu to do things with his body that most humans simply cannot do. The wire work alone took weeks of preparation. The slow-motion sequences, the kicks, and the way he had to spin and strike and land, all of it had to look weightless and inevitable on screen, which meant in real life it had to be practiced until it lived in his muscles and not just in his mind. Solomon was brought in for 6 weeks of pre-production training. He stayed for 6 months. The decision to extend was not made formally. It just kept not being time to leave. Because something was happening in that gym that neither of them fully had words for yet. A rhythm that built between a teacher and a student when both of them are being honest. Both of them are working hard, and neither of them is pretending. There was one Thursday in the 3rd week that Solomon would remember for years afterward. Keanu had been attempting a particular wire sequence for most of the afternoon. It required a specific rotation of his body at a specific moment. The kind of movement that is 7% physical and 93% trust. He had attempted it 4 times. Each time, something in him seized up at the last moment. Not from lack of ability, from something older and quieter than ability. He sat down on the gym floor. Not dramatically, just sat. Solomon walked over and sat down next to him, right there on the mat. In his workout clothes, knees folded, like they were 2 people having a conversation at a kitchen table, rather than in a professional training facility with a film crew's schedule pressing on every hour. "What is it?" Solomon asked. Keanu was quiet for a moment. "My body doesn't believe it yet," he said. Solomon nodded like that was the most reasonable thing he had heard all week. "No, your body will follow your mind," he said. "But your mind has to give it somewhere to go. Right now, you're thinking about the fall. The part where things could go wrong." He paused. "Stop thinking about that." "What do I think about instead?" Keanu asked. "Landing," Solomon said simply. "Think about landing. Not the fall, the landing. What comes after?" Keanu looked at the mat for a long moment. Then he stood up. He got it on the next attempt. After the Matrix wrapped and became the phenomenon that it became, the 2 men went their separate ways, in the way that people do when life is moving fast. Keanu moved toward a kind of fame that is difficult to describe unless you have watched it happen to someone. A complete and permanent change in the texture of daily life, in what is possible and what is no longer possible. See in who gets to see the real version of you, and who only gets the version that has been processed through cameras and headlines. Solomon moved on to other productions, other actors, other gyms with buzzing fluorescent lights. But they stayed in touch. Not in the hollow way that Hollywood people sometimes stay in touch, calling each other brother at award shows, and then going silent for 3 years. In a real way. Phone calls that started with nothing in particular and ended an hour later. Text messages that were just a photo, and no explanation because no explanation was needed. Saturday afternoons with 2 cups of coffee. And then April 2001 came. Keanu's girlfriend, Jennifer Syme, died in a car accident on April 2nd. She was 28 years old. See, she had been driving home in the early morning hours when she lost control of her Jeep on Cahuenga Boulevard, the same street where the training gym had been, where Keanu had learned to fall and to think about landing. She died less than 18 months after the stillbirth of their daughter, Ava Archer Syme Reeves, who had been born too early in December 1999 and had never taken a single breath outside the hospital. 2 losses. Inside 18 months. Losses of a specific kind that go so deep they change the shape of a person. Solomon did not call. He did not text. He drove to Keanu's house and knocked on the door, and when Keanu opened it, Solomon was standing there with food he had cooked himself. Rice, chicken, something warm and simple. And he said nothing. He came in. He sat down. He stayed for 2 days. And he did not try to explain anything. He did not try to fix anything. He did not tell Keanu how to feel or when to feel differently. He simply stayed. That is the kind of thing that cannot be performed or planned. That is the kind of thing that is either in a person or it is not. It was in Solomon. 23 years later, sitting on a lobby staircase in East Hollywood with a yellow eviction notice and 2 black garbage bags and the sun still not fully risen, Solomon Ayers pressed that name on his phone. Keanu. The name left Solomon's mind and entered his phone screen as a pressed button, and the phone began to ring. But before that call connected, in the space of those 2 rings, in the small silence of a lobby staircase on a Tuesday morning in October, there is something else the story needs you to know. As because every story about a person who does harm has another story inside it. A smaller, quieter one. The story of how that person became someone capable of the harm in the first place. Gerald Pruitt did not grow up mean. That matters. Not because it excuses anything, it does not, but because understanding how ordinary people arrive at cruel decisions is the only way to truly understand why those decisions feel so devastating to the people on the receiving end. Gerald Pruitt grew up in Torrance, California, 20 miles south of Los Angeles, where the air smelled faintly of the nearby refinery on certain wind directions, and the streets were wide and flat, and lined with the kind of houses that all look slightly like each other. His father sold insurance out of a small office on Hawthorne Boulevard. His mother taught second grade at a public elementary school where she stayed for 21 years and was genuinely loved by her students, who made her cards at Christmas and remembered her name decades later. They were not wealthy, but they were comfortable. There is a particular kind of California comfortable that looks like enough. A house with a yard, 2 cars that work, vacations to San Diego in the summer. Gerald grew up inside that kind of enough and understood, without anyone ever saying it directly, that the goal of his life was to have more of it. He went to California State University, Dominguez Hills, and studied business. He was an average student in the specific way that average students are, not failing, not excelling, occupying the middle of every room he entered with a reliable, forgettable competence. See, he graduated in 1994 with a degree, a firm handshake, and the belief that the world was a transaction waiting to happen. He spent the next decade working in commercial real estate, learning the language of it, learning how buildings were valued, bought, leveraged, and sold, learning which numbers on a spreadsheet mattered and which were just background noise. By 2010, he had saved enough to buy his first small apartment building in Gardena. By 2015, he had bought the building on Kenmore Avenue for $1.4 million. By 2022, 7 years later, without any significant improvements to the property, that same building had appreciated in value to nearly $3.8 million. Gerald Pruitt had not made that building worth more. The city had. The neighborhood had. The years had. The people living inside it, paying rent every month and keeping their units clean and knowing their neighbors' names, they had, in their own quiet way, contributed to the value of something they did not own. Gerald Pruitt had simply waited. That is not a crime. In California, real estate, it is practically a business model. But Gerald had a problem that many landlords in Los Angeles shared in 2022. 3 of his 8 units at Kenmore Avenue were occupied by long-term residents paying rents set years earlier, protected by the city's rent stabilization ordinance from increases beyond a small annual percentage. Solomon Ayers paid $1,240 a month for his 2-bedroom apartment. The same unit, offered to a new tenant in October 2022, could command $2,850 or more every single month. Well, Gerald looked at the distance between those two numbers, $1,610, and felt it the way certain people feel money they believe is owed to them. He had a real estate attorney named Philip Strand, who worked out of an office on Ventura Boulevard in Sherman Oaks. Philip Strand had used the Ellis Act successfully for Gerald once before, in 2020, on a 4-unit property in Palms. The tenants had left. Gerald had renovated both vacated units in 4 months and re-rented them at market rate within the year. He had done the math. He knew it worked. So on that Tuesday morning in October, he had woken up, put on his old mustard polo shirt, picked up his clipboard, and called Pacific Coast Enforcement Services. He had chosen Solomon first because Solomon seemed, on paper, like the path of least resistance. No spouse, no children listed on the lease, a freelance worker in the film industry, which, to Gerald's way of thinking, meant a person accustomed to impermanence, a person who moved around. Gerald Pruitt did not know Solomon Ayres. He knew Solomon's unit number. He knew Solomon's rent amount. He knew the number of years on the lease. He did not know about the Saturday afternoons. He did not know about the black pickup truck parked around the corner on Rosewood. He did not know about the tall man in the gray hoodie carrying 2 coffees from the Vietnamese place on Fountain Avenue. He did not know about 1999, about a gym on Cahuenga Boulevard, about a wire sequence and a mat on the floor, and 4 words that had traveled 23 years to arrive at this moment. Think about the landing. Gerald Pruitt only knew numbers. And numbers, it turned out, it were about to become the one language he truly understood, spoken back to him in a way he had never anticipated. But that part of the story belonged to later. Right now, it was still 6:47 in the morning on a Tuesday in October 2022. The lobby door had swung shut. The building had gone quiet again. And Solomon Ayres was still sitting on the staircase with his face in his hands and 2 black garbage bags at his feet, and a yellow piece of paper tucked under his arm that said his life here was over. He sat there for a long time. 20 minutes, maybe. Perhaps a little more. He was not the kind of man who asked for help easily. That is not something Solomon had ever said about himself out loud. It was just something that lived inside him the way certain things do, inherited without being spoken, absorbed without being taught. His father, Raymond Ayres, had worked double shifts at a bottling plant in Inglewood for 19 years, without once using the word struggling in conversation. Not at the dinner table, not on the phone with relatives, not even, as far as Solomon could tell, alone in the car on the long drive home when he thought no one was listening. Raymond Ayres carried his weight in silence and called that strength, and his son had grown up watching it and learning it and never thinking to question whether it was actually true. So Solomon had spent his life carrying things. He had carried a divorce in 2009, a quiet ending with a woman named Diane, who was good and decent, and simply wanted a life that did not fit the shape of the one Solomon had built. There was no ugliness in it, just the deep, the hollow silence that moves into an apartment after a person leaves and stays for a very long time. He had carried that silence by filling it with books, with music, with the sounds of his neighbors through the thin walls. Rosa's television at night, the young couple in 1A who argued sometimes and laughed louder than they argued, the smell of Mrs. Washington's cooking from the ground floor unit that had been empty since 2020 and which Solomon still missed, like a small ghost. He had carried the lean years of the mid-2000s when stunt work slowed and the calls came less frequently, and he ate a lot of rice and beans and watched his savings with the focused attention of someone watching a water level they cannot allow to drop below a certain line. He had not told anyone about those years, not his sister Paulette in Atlanta, not Keanu, not anyone. He had carried a health scare in 2021 that had started as a feeling, the vague, unlocatable kind of feeling that a person who works in physical performance learns to notice even when they do not want to, and had become a series of tests and a conversation in a doctor's office that had changed the weight of every day since. He had carried that one most carefully of all. Now he sat on a lobby staircase and looked at his phone. He had 17 contacts he would genuinely call in a crisis. Real ones, people who would pick up. He scrolled past most of them with a kind of mental efficiency that was its own form of sadness. His sister Paulette. She had 2 kids in school, a mortgage on a house in Decatur. She was 1 bad month away from stressing over, and a husband who had been between jobs since the spring. She did not need this on top of that. His old friend Darnell Moss, who had done stunt work alongside him through most of the 2000s, and who was genuinely one of the best people Solomon had ever known. But Darnell had just started a logistics job in Riverside that he needed to keep, and Solomon was not going to call him on a Tuesday morning and pour something this large into his day. Rosa Cienfuegos from apartment 3A. She would cry immediately and then try to feed him. And both of those things were acts of love. But neither of them would stop Gerald Pruitt from sending someone back at 9 o'clock. He stopped scrolling. The name sat at the top of his recent contacts. Keanu. Solomon stared at it. Here is the thing about asking for help, when you have spent your entire life not asking for it. The moment right before you do it is the hardest moment. Not the asking itself. The moment just before. When every quiet voice inside you that sounds like your father lines up and reminds you that you are supposed to carry your own weight. That other people have their own weight. That calling someone at 6:47 in the morning with a problem is a transfer of burden. And transfer of burden is weakness. And weakness is the one thing you were never supposed to be. Solomon looked at the name for a long time. Then he thought about something. He thought about a Tuesday afternoon in 2001, when he had driven across the city without calling first, and knocked on a door and walked in with food he had cooked himself, and sat down and not said a single word, and stayed for 2 days. He had not asked if Keanu wanted him there. He had simply shown up. And because showing up when someone needs you is not a transfer of burden. It is the point. He pressed the name. The phone rang twice. Saul. Keanu's voice came through low and calm, carrying no performance in it. Just presence. The kind of voice a person has when they have answered a call from someone they love, and their entire attention has already moved toward that person before a single word has been exchanged. "Hey," Solomon said. A pause. Short but full. The kind of pause that contains a question being answered without being asked. "What happened?" Keanu said. Not a question. A sentence. Solomon told him. All of it. The clipboard. The yellow paper. The man in the gray uniform who stared at the floor. The 9 o'clock deadline. The Ellis Act. And the reversed rent payment. And the way Gerald Pruitt had looked at him. Or rather, I had not looked at him. Had looked at the space around him the way you look at furniture you have already decided to move. He told him all of it in one long, even stream, the way a person talks when they have been holding something behind a door, and the door finally opens. Keanu was quiet through every word of it. When Solomon stopped, the silence on the line lasted exactly 4 seconds. "Okay," Keanu said. "I'm not asking you to—" Solomon started. "I know," Keanu said. Quiet. Certain. Not cutting him off, but gently, firmly, setting the sentence aside. "I know you're not. Where are you right now?" "Stairs," Solomon said. "Lobby stairs." "Go make coffee," Keanu said. "I'm going to make some calls. Give me an hour." "Keanu?" Soul. His voice was the same voice that had sat on a gym mat in 1999 and said, "Think about landing, not the fall. Gentle and certain in equal measure. Go make coffee." Solomon stood up from the stair. He picked up one garbage bag. He left the other one. He walked upstairs to apartment 2B and unlocked his door and went to his kitchen and filled the kettle and set it on the stove. He stood at the counter and looked out the window at the pale October morning coming fully awake over East Hollywood. 53 minutes later, his phone buzzed on the kitchen table. A text from Keanu. 4 words. "Don't pack a single thing." Solomon read the text twice. He set his phone face down on the kitchen table. He looked at his coffee cup. He looked at the window. He looked at the walls of his apartment. the framed photograph of his father in his work clothes taken sometime in the late 1970s. The small wooden shelf he had built himself and mounted slightly crooked and never fixed because the crookedness had become familiar. The stack of books on the side table next to the reading chair that had been there so long they had become part of the furniture. He did not pack a single thing. He sat down, he drank his coffee. He waited. And while he waited, 53 blocks away, and moving with a quiet and deliberate speed that most people would never associate with a man his level of famous, Keanu Reeves went to work. Most people, when a friend calls them in crisis, respond with the tools they have available to them. They call another friend. They look something up. They offer to come over. They share the problem with someone else, talk it through slowly, and make a plan the way people do when the situation feels urgent, but not yet urgent enough to move without thinking. Keanu did not do it that way. He had learned something across the years of loss that had moved through his life, the kind of losses that do not announce themselves in advance and do not wait for you to be ready. His daughter, who had never breathed. Jennifer, who had been alive and then was not. The accumulation of griefs that a private person carries without press releases or public processing. He had learned, through all of it, that the distance between deciding to do something and actually doing it should be made as short as possible. Life did not wait, so he did not wait. He got off the phone with Solomon at 7:34 in the morning. At 7:41, 7 minutes later, he called his attorney. Her name was Patricia Vo, and she had been Keanu's legal representative for 12 years and had built a reputation in Los Angeles legal circles that rested on three qualities that rarely exist together in a single person. She was precise, she was fast, and she was completely impossible to rattle. She had handled contract disputes, privacy matters, and situations that required the kind of discretion that does not get discussed at dinner parties. She answered on the second ring. "I need everything you can find on a residential property," Keanu said. 1118 North Kenmore Avenue, East Hollywood. Owner, mortgage status, liens, any active permits or violations, anything attached to the title. Everything. Patricia did not ask why. She had long ago stopped asking why on calls like this one. "Give me 40 minutes," she said. And at 7:45, 4 minutes after hanging up with Patricia, Keanu called a commercial real estate broker named James Okpara. James worked out of an office in Culver City and specialized in multifamily residential properties across Los Angeles County. He had helped Keanu with a small investment property in Silver Lake in 2019, a quiet purchase that had never appeared in any headline, and he had handled it with the kind of efficiency and discretion that earns a permanent place in a person's phone contacts. "James," Keanu said, "I need to acquire a building today, a residential property, cash transaction. Are you available?" James Okpara had been in real estate for 17 years. He had received unusual calls before. This one was different. "Tell me what you need," James said. At 8:12 in the morning, Patricia Vo called back. But she had the information. The building at 1118 North Kenmore Avenue was owned outright by a man named Gerald Pruitt through a limited liability company called Pruitt Pacific Properties. This was standard practice. Most experienced real estate investors held their properties inside LLCs to separate personal finances from business liabilities. The building carried no active mortgage. There were no liens recorded against the title. One open permit existed, filed in 2021 for a plumbing repair on the second floor that appeared to have been completed but never formally signed off. "What's the assessed value?" Keanu asked. "County has it at $2.1 million, Patricia said. But comparable multifamily sales in that zip code over the last 18 months put fair market value somewhere between $3.4 and $3.9 million. And the gap exists because county assessments always run behind actual market movement. Keanu was quiet for a moment. What would it take to buy it today? Patricia considered this with the precision she applied to everything. A cash offer above market, with a fast close. No loan contingencies, no extended inspection periods, clean and simple. Sellers using the Ellis Act to clear tenants are almost always motivated by liquidity. They want the money more than they want the highest possible price. A number above $4 million with a 15-day close would be very difficult for most sellers in that position to walk away from. What number? Keanu asked. North of $4 million, Patricia said. Meaningfully north. And the 15-day close matters as much as the price. Keanu did the arithmetic in his head without apparent difficulty. He had made significant money from the John Wick franchise. The first film in 2014, the second in 2017, the third in 2019, the fourth scheduled for release in April 2023, just months away. The combined box office across those three completed films had exceeded $584 million worldwide. His back-end participation in the franchise was well documented in industry circles. But money, by itself, does not explain what Keanu Reeves was doing at 8:12 on a Tuesday morning in October 2022. What explains it is this. He was known, among people who actually knew him, for spending almost none of it on himself. He did not own a yacht. He did not maintain a collection of homes in multiple countries. In 2010, he had been photographed on the New York City subway, sitting in a regular seat, giving it up to a woman who boarded carrying a heavy bag. He then standing for the rest of the ride holding the overhead rail like any other passenger. Nobody had staged that photograph. Nobody had called a publicist. It was just a Tuesday on the subway, and a man who did not think his fame entitled him to a seat. Someone else needed more. He had the money. Make the call, Keanu said. At 8:47 in the morning, while Solomon Ayers sat at his kitchen table in apartment 2B with a second cup of coffee going cold, looking at the window and the morning and the walls of the home he had been told he had until 9 o'clock to leave, James Okpara called Philip Strand, Gerald Pruitt's real estate attorney, at his office on Ventura Boulevard in Sherman Oaks. I represent a buyer with serious interest in the Kenmore Avenue property, James said. Cash offer, clean title, no contingencies, 15-day close. My client is prepared to offer $4,200,000. There was a silence on Philip Strand's end of the line. Not a long silence, but a particular kind. The silence of a person recalculating. Let me make a call, Philip Strand said. At 9:03 in the morning, 3 minutes past the deadline Gerald Pruitt had given Solomon Ayers to vacate his home of 11 years, Gerald Pruitt called his attorney back. He said 3 words. Find out who. Philip Strand called James Okpara. My client would like to know the identity of the buyer before proceeding. The buyer prefers to remain anonymous during the offer phase, James said pleasantly. Standard practice. Does your client have a counter? Gerald Pruitt, through his attorney, countered at $4.5 million. James called Keanu. So Keanu said 2 words. Accept it. At 10:14 in the morning, a purchase agreement was signed electronically by both parties, subject to a standard 15-day due diligence period and a clean close. At 10:17, Keanu opened his text thread with Solomon and typed 7 words. He looked at them for a moment. Then he pressed send. Solomon's phone buzzed on the kitchen table. He picked it up. He read the screen. Building is mine in 15 days. You're not going anywhere. Solomon set the phone down. He looked at the walls of his apartment, the crooked shelf, his father's photograph, the stack of books by the reading chair. He covered his face with both hands. This time, unlike the staircase, unlike the lobby, unlike the 20 minutes of sitting still and trying to understand how 11 years could end before sunrise, this time, Solomon Ayres cried. Not the polite kind of crying that people do when they are aware of being watched. Not the brief, controlled kind that lasts 30 seconds and gets folded back inside a person before anyone notices. The kind that comes up from somewhere deep and takes over the whole body for a few minutes, shoulders shaking, breath uneven, the kind of crying that has been waiting behind a door for a long time and does not stop until it is finished. He let it happen. He sat at his kitchen table in apartment 2B with his coffee going cold beside him, and the October morning fully arrived outside his window, and he cried until he was done. Then he wiped his face with the back of his hand. He stood up. He poured the cold coffee down the sink and made a fresh cup. He opened the window and let in the cool air and the sound of Kenmore Avenue waking up. A delivery truck somewhere on the next block. The taco stand owner pulling up his metal shutter with a rolling crash. A child somewhere above being told twice to put on their shoes. He was not going anywhere. 15 days in real estate is almost impossibly fast. A standard residential purchase moves in 30 to 60 days minimum. There are inspections to schedule and complete. Title searches that must trace the legal ownership of a property back through every recorded transaction in its history. Loan approvals that require a bank to review, underwrite, and approve an application through multiple departments. Negotiations over small contractual details that seem minor but carry legal weight. The whole process is deliberately, structurally slow, because the amounts of money involved are serious, and the documents being signed will govern a piece of land and everything on it for years to come. But cash transactions move in a different universe. When there is no bank, no loan officer, no underwriter working through a checklist, the timeline collapses to its essential core. Two parties who both want the deal, attorneys who can move fast, and a title company that can process the transfer cleanly. Everything else falls away. Both parties wanted this deal done. Gerald Pruitt had not yet learned who was buying his building when he accepted the offer. That was the buyer's legal right, to remain anonymous through the offer and counteroffer stage. Pruitt knew only that the buyer was represented by a reputable broker, that the money was real, and that the offer was higher than anything he had realistically expected to receive in a direct sale. In those 15 days, two things happened in parallel. The first was legal. Patricia Vo worked through the due diligence with the methodical speed of someone who has done this many times and makes no unnecessary moves. She reviewed the title history. She examined the open plumbing permit and arranged for it to be formally signed off. She drafted the closing documents with a specific clause embedded inside them, written in plain contractual language, but carrying the weight of everything this purchase actually meant, that required all current tenants to remain entirely undisturbed throughout the due diligence period. No further eviction proceedings, no contact from enforcement companies, but no communication of any kind regarding tenancy termination. Philip Strand, reviewing the clause on Gerald Pruitt's behalf, noted it, passed it to his client, and received a one-word reply. Fine. Gerald wanted the money. The tenants could stay for 15 more days. The second thing that happened was quieter. It happened inside the building itself, in the ordinary daily texture of the lives being lived there, none of which had stopped moving just because an enormous thing was occurring around them. Solomon taught a 2-day stunt workshop at a production training facility in Burbank on the Thursday and Friday of the first week. He drove there in his 12-year-old Civic, with the window that didn't roll all the way down, and he spent 2 days teaching a group of 12 young performers how to take a punch correctly, how to move the head, how to time the reaction, how to make something look real without making it real. He was good at it. He had always been good at it. He came home both evenings to an apartment that was still his. On the Thursday of the second week, he had a medical appointment. A follow-up at Kaiser Permanente on Sunset Boulevard that had been scheduled 3 months earlier, and which he had kept, as he kept all of them, alone. He drove there in the Civic. He sat in the waiting room with a magazine he did not read. He went in, he listened, he scheduled his next appointment. He drove home. He sat at the kitchen table without turning the lights on, and let the apartment go dark around him as the afternoon became evening. After a while, he got up and opened the kitchen cabinet. He looked at the envelope taped to the inside panel, the one in his own handwriting, and the 3 words on the front, "Not yet. Soon." He touched it lightly with 2 fingers. He did not take it down. He closed the cabinet. He turned on the kitchen light. He made dinner. On November 7th, 2022, the 15th day, the closing took place at a title company office on Wilshire Boulevard in the mid-Wilshire district of Los Angeles. The conference room had a long table and a window that looked out over the tops of other buildings and a water pitcher that nobody touched. Keanu arrived with Patricia Vo and James Okpara. Gerald Pruitt arrived with Philip Strand. When Keanu Reeves walked through the conference room door, Gerald Pruitt's face moved through several expressions with the rapid, involuntary quality of a person trying to solve a problem they have just realized is much larger than they thought. Recognition, calculation, or something that was not quite embarrassment but lived in the same neighborhood. He knew the face. Everyone knew the face. "Mr. Reeves," Philip Strand said, recovering with the professional smoothness of an attorney who has learned to be unshakable in conference rooms. "Pleasure to meet you." Keanu nodded. He sat down. He signed where Patricia indicated, methodically and without ceremony. He shook the notary's hand. He was calm in a way that had nothing performed about it. Not cold, not theatrical, simply present. The way a person is calm when they know exactly what they are doing and made peace with it long before they walked into the room. When the final document was signed and the wire transfer of $4.5 million was confirmed on the title company's system, Keanu stood up and put on his jacket. Gerald Pruitt spoke for the first time since the pleasantries at the door. "Mr. Reeves." He was working hard to sound conversational. "Might I ask what your plans are for the property?" Keanu looked at him steadily. Not with anger, not with coldness, with something more difficult to absorb. The calm, clear look of a person who has understood something true about you that you have not yet been honest enough to understand about yourself. "I'm going to take care of it," Keanu said simply. He picked up his copy of the documents. He walked toward the door. Then he stopped. He turned back. "My attorney will be in touch this week about your lease terms," he said. Gerald Pruitt's eyebrows moved upward. "My lease terms?" Patricia Vo, still seated, placing documents back into her folder with the unhurried efficiency of someone who had been quietly looking forward to this particular moment, looked up. "The storage unit at the rear of the property," she said pleasantly. "Ground floor. You've been renting it to yourself through your LLC at $140 per month, recorded as an operating expense. The new owner is adjusting that rate to current market value." She closed the folder. $840 per month. Effective immediately. Gerald Pruitt's mouth opened. Nothing came out. Keanu walked out through the door and into the Los Angeles afternoon, where the November sun was sitting low and golden over Wilshire Boulevard, and the city was doing what it always does, moving, indifferent, enormous. and one small building on Kenmore Avenue was, for the first time in a long time, in the hands of someone who intended to take care of it. He drove back to East Hollywood, not to make an announcement, not to stand in front of the building with anyone watching. He just drove there and parked around the corner on Rosewood Avenue the way he always did, and walked to the entrance and buzzed apartment 2B, and waited with his hands in the pockets of his gray hoodie until Solomon's voice came through the intercom. "It's done?" Solomon said through the speaker. "It's done," Keanu said. The door clicked open. 2 days later, on November 9th, 2022, every occupied unit in the building received a letter. It was slipped under each door in a plain white envelope with the unit number handwritten on the front. No company logo, no legal letterhead, no language designed to protect anyone from liability or confusion. It was written to be understood by anyone who read it. It said, "Dear resident, the building you live in has new ownership as of November 7th, 2022. My name is Keanu Reeves, and I am the new owner. I want you to know the following things, which I am putting in writing so you can keep this letter and refer to it. Your current rent rate will not increase for the next 5 years. Your tenancy is secure. I have no plans to redevelop or substantially alter this property. I intend to make reasonable repairs and improvements to the building, beginning with the elevator, which I understand has been out of service since 2019. You do not need to do anything. You may stay. If you have questions or concerns, please contact my property manager, whose name and number are listed below. Thank you for making this a home." Kayar Rosa Cienfuegos, 71 years old, apartment 3A, read the letter standing in her doorway, in her housecoat and her reading glasses. She read it once. Then she read it again, more slowly, the way you reread something when the first reading seems too good to be accurate. Then she walked downstairs and knocked on the door of apartment 2B. Solomon opened it. He was in a plain white t-shirt and socks. He had clearly just been reading. Rosa held out the letter. Solomon looked at it. He looked at her. "A friend did this," he said quietly. Rosa Cienfuegos looked at him for a long moment, with the particular expression of a woman who has lived 71 years and knows the difference between luck and love. Then she stepped forward and pulled Solomon into a hug, both her arms around him, yet her head against his chest. She held on for a long time. Solomon stood very still and let her. The property management was handed to a small company called Pacific Standard Properties, run by a woman named Adrienne Cho, who had been managing residential buildings in Los Angeles for 14 years. She had a specific reputation in the industry, not for being the cheapest or the fastest or the most aggressive, but for treating both buildings and tenants as things that deserved genuine care. She returned phone calls. She showed up when something needed to be looked at. She kept records the way a person keeps records when they actually intend to use them. Adrienne met with her new client once before beginning work on the Kenmore Avenue property. She came with a clipboard of her own, nothing like Gerald Pruitt's, at which had carried termination notices and enforcement paperwork. Hers carried an inspection checklist and a list of questions. Keanu told her 3 things. Fix what is broken. Keep what works. Ask the residents what they need. Adrienne nodded and went to work. The elevator repair was scheduled within the first week of ownership. The contractor, a licensed elevator maintenance company based in Glendale, assessed the unit and provided a quote of $27,400 for a full mechanical overhaul. The work was authorized the same day the quote was received. It took 11 days. On the morning the elevator was certified operational and the out of order sign was taken down from its door. that faded sign with its gray letters that had been there since 2019. Miguel Fuentes from apartment 1C rode it up to the third floor and back down again by himself, just because he could. He stood in it with his arms crossed and watched the floor numbers change on the small display panel above the door and felt something that was larger than the thing itself. He did not have a word for it right away. Later, he would decide the word was dignity. The building's exterior was power-washed and repainted in the weeks that followed. The color chosen was a warm off-white that made the peeling, tired face of the building look rested. New mailboxes were installed in the lobby, proper ones, with engraved metal number plates and small individual locks, whose keys were hand-delivered to each resident by Adrienne Cho herself, along with a brief, friendly introduction. The persistent roof leak on the third floor, which had been patched and repatched by Gerald Pruitt's maintenance contractors over 4 years, with the bare minimum of materials and effort, leaving a yellowed water stain on the ceiling of apartment 3B that had grown slowly like a map of somewhere, was properly repaired. Not patched, repaired. The section of roofing was replaced entirely. The 2 units that had been vacant under Pruitt's ownership, left empty and in poor condition, their windows dusty, their walls marked, were cleaned, repaired, and offered to residents from a housing waitlist maintained by a nonprofit organization called Esperanza Housing Collaborative, which worked specifically with adults who had experienced housing instability and were working to reestablish themselves. The application process was handled entirely by Adrienne and Esperanza together. Keanu was not involved in selecting who moved in. He did not want to be. He had made the space. Other people would fill it. None of this was announced to the press. Keanu Reeves did not call a journalist. He did not invite a camera crew to document the elevator repair. He did not post a photograph of the new mailboxes, or the fresh paint, or the moment Rosa Cienfuegos read the letter in her doorway. He did not film himself handing anyone anything. He did not do any of it for an audience. But stories like this one do not stay quiet. They never do. Because the people inside them are real, and real people talk to each other, and sometimes one of them has a phone and a thought and a Tuesday morning with nothing else pulling at their attention. Miguel Fuentes, our night shift worker at a printing shop on Melrose Avenue, posted a photograph on Twitter in the last week of November 2022. It was a simple photograph. The new mailboxes in the lobby, clean and bright, each unit number properly engraved in neat metal lettering. Below the photograph, he wrote, "Our landlord got bought out by Keanu Reeves. Guy fixed the elevator, repainted the building, kept everyone's rent the same for 5 years. Landlord's storage unit rent went up 6 times. Good morning." The tweet was shared 140,000 times in the following 48 hours. Headlines appeared in publications across 12 countries. Comment sections filled in dozens of languages with versions of the same sentence, typed by strangers who had never met each other and never would, but who had read the story and felt something loosen slightly inside them. This is the kind of thing you hope is real. It was real. And inside apartment 2B, Solomon Ayres read the headlines on his phone and set it face down on the kitchen table, and looked out the window at the building across the street where the taco stand was pulling up its metal shutter for the morning, and the dry cleaner's lights were coming on, and the day was beginning the way days do, without ceremony, without announcement, with the quiet and unstoppable insistence of something that intends to continue. He was still here. For now, that was everything. But now has a way of moving. It shifts and becomes then, becomes before, becomes the thing you look back at from a different place. And Solomon Ayres is sitting at his kitchen table with his phone face down, and the taco stand opening across the street, and the morning coming in through the window, knew that for now was not the same as forever. He had known that for a while. Since May of 2021, to be precise. There is a particular kind of tiredness that has nothing to do with sleep. It is not the tiredness that comes after a long day of physical work, the honest, heavy kind that settles into your muscles and releases with rest. That kind is almost pleasant. It has a clean simplicity to it. You are tired because you did something. You sleep. You are less tired. The world makes sense. This other kind lives somewhere different. It lives in the part of you that holds secrets, the part that keeps a careful inventory of what you have not said, and to whom, and for how long. And it accumulates the way certain debts do, silently, in the background, with interest you do not notice until the total becomes something you cannot ignore. Solomon had been carrying that kind of tired for 18 months. It had started with a feeling in the spring of 2021, the vague, unlocatable kind of feeling. Not pain, exactly, more like a change in the weather of his own body, that he noticed the way a person who has worked physically for 30 years learns to notice changes. Small, easy to postpone, easy to assign to something ordinary. Too much coffee, not enough water. The kind of thing that resolves on its own if you give it a few weeks. He gave it a few weeks. It did not resolve. He went to his doctor at Kaiser Permanente on Sunset Boulevard, a primary care physician named Dr. Angela Tran, who had been his doctor for 6 years, and who had a straightforward, no-wasted-words manner that Solomon appreciated. She ordered blood work. She ordered an ultrasound. The ultrasound found something. What followed was the particular experience of being handed information about your own body in installments, each piece leading to another test, another appointment, another piece. It has a rhythm to it that is not quite fear and not quite calm, but something that moves between the two with exhausting regularity. By May of 2021, Solomon was sitting across from a soft-spoken oncologist named Dr. Richard Matsuda at the Kaiser Oncology Center on Sunset Boulevard. Dr. Matsuda had a way of delivering hard information carefully, laying it out in layers, making sure you had absorbed one piece before he placed the next one on top of it. Watching your face the whole time, with the practiced attention of someone who understands that information, received in the wrong way, can do as much damage as the thing it describes. What Dr. Matsuda told Solomon was this: there was a mass in his liver, hepatocellular carcinoma, liver cancer, in plain language, caught at a stage where treatment was possible. Genuinely possible, Dr. Matsuda was careful to say. Not the kind of possible that is used to soften impossible. But the road would be long, and the outcome was not something anyone could promise. Solomon listened to every word. He asked specific, practical questions. He took the printed information sheets from the medical assistant. He scheduled his follow-up. He drove home alone in his Civic with the window that didn't roll all the way down. And he did not call his sister Paulette in Atlanta. He did not call Darnell. He did not knock on Rosa's door. He did not call Keanu. He had made a decision, the kind that feels logical when you are sitting in a parking structure collecting yourself before driving home. And that becomes harder and harder to justify the longer it holds. That he would not bring this to the people who loved him until he had something concrete to say. Not, there might be a problem, but here is what the problem is. And here is the plan. And here is what we are doing about it. He went through his first round of treatment in the summer of 2021. He was sick in a way that required careful management of every day. He went to his infusion appointments in the early mornings. He came home and slept. He ate what he could manage. And on the days when the nausea was worst, the 2 or 3 in the morning kind, when the apartment was dark and absolutely quiet, and there was nothing to focus on except how his body felt, he did not call anyone. He watched old films. He read. He made soup from a recipe his mother had taught him when he was 9 years old. He did not call anyone. By the end of 2021, the treatment had produced what Dr. Matsuda described with careful optimism as a meaningful reduction. Not remission, not a clear result, but a reduction significant enough to change the trajectory of the conversation from managing to fighting with some real ground gained. By the spring of 2022, the reduction appeared to be holding. By October 2022, the month Gerald Pruitt walked into the lobby with his clipboard. Solomon was in a period his doctors called watchful waiting, and the mass had not grown. The numbers in his blood work had stabilized. They were monitoring carefully and regularly, and the picture, while not simple, was not the darkest version of itself. But Solomon was tired. Not from the treatment, which had eased, from the carrying. 18 months of appointments attended alone. 18 months of fine said in a particular way when people asked how he was. 18 months of the envelope inside the kitchen cabinet, the one addressed to Keanu in his own careful handwriting, the one that said, "Not yet," soon on the outside, and said everything on the inside, taped in place and untouched. When Gerald Pruitt had arrived with his clipboard and his yellow paper and his 9 o'clock deadline, the eviction notice had landed on top of 18 months of already carrying something very heavy. And something had shifted. Not broken. Shifted. The way a load shifts when you have been holding it in one position for too long and your body finally, without asking permission, adjusts. He had called Keanu from the staircase. He had told him about the building. He had not yet told him about the envelope. But the envelope was no longer taped quite as firmly as it had been before. Not yet. The word "yet" had been doing a lot of work for a long time. It was getting tired, too. And on a Saturday evening in early December 2022, in the warm kitchen of apartment 2B, and with the newly repaired elevator humming quietly somewhere in the building's walls, and the smell of Rose's rooftop lavender drifting in through the cracked window, and 2 cups of coffee from the Vietnamese place on Fountain Avenue, sitting between 2 men on a small kitchen table. The word "yet" finally ran out of the energy required to keep doing its job. Keanu had arrived at 4 in the afternoon, the way he sometimes did on Saturdays. He had parked around the corner on Rosewood and walked to the entrance with the coffees and buzzed 2B and waited on the step the way he always waited. Not impatiently, not checking his phone, just standing there in his gray hoodie in the early December cool, present in the specific unhurried way of a person who has decided that wherever they are is exactly where they intend to be. Solomon had buzzed him up. They had sat at the kitchen table and talked for an hour about things that did not carry weight. A film Solomon had watched twice that week, a quiet Japanese movie from the 1950s that he had seen years ago and returned to the way you return to certain books. Not for new information, but for the particular feeling of something familiar that still manages to surprise you. A piece of music Keanu had discovered, something instrumental and strange that he had been listening to in the mornings. The way the building looked now in the late afternoon light with its fresh paint, the warmth of the off-white color against the low December sun. They had ridden the elevator together earlier, up to the 3rd floor and back down. Oh, for no reason, except that it worked now, and that small fact still carried a satisfaction neither of them had put entirely into words. After an hour, Solomon stood up to make more coffee. He moved to the counter. He filled the kettle. He set it on the stove. He stood with his back to the table, watching the blue ring of the burner come to life beneath the kettle's base, and the kitchen went quiet in a way that was different from comfortable quiet. It was the quiet of something waiting. "Sol," Keanu said. "Yeah." "You've been wanting to tell me something." He did not say for a while. He did not say, "I've noticed," or "I've been waiting," or any of the other framings a person might use to make the observation smaller or easier to receive. He just said it the way it was. A simple, the direct statement from someone who had been paying careful attention for a very long time, and had decided that the moment had arrived to say so out loud. Solomon stood at the counter. He did not turn around. He looked at the kettle. He looked at the blue flame. He looked at the cabinet directly above the stove. Not that one, the wrong cabinet. He moved his eyes to the one beside it, the one with the mugs, and then to the one beside that. He reached up and opened the cabinet. He took down the envelope. He did not look at it. He walked to the table and set it down in front of Keanu without turning around. Then he went back to the counter and stood there facing the kettle and the blue flame and the backsplash of small white tiles he had looked at 10,000 times. "You can open it," Solomon said. The kitchen was very quiet, and he heard the sound of the envelope being picked up. Then the small, clean sound of it being opened. Keanu read the letter slowly. Solomon knew he was reading slowly, because Keanu did everything slowly when it mattered. Not from hesitation, but from the same quality of attention he brought to everything he genuinely cared about. He gave things the time they required. The letter was 3 pages. Solomon had written it in March of 2022. At this same table, on a Sunday morning when the building was quiet and the light was good, and he had finally admitted to himself that the word "yet" was a promise he might not be able to keep indefinitely. He had written everything. The feeling in the spring of 2021. Dr. Tran and the blood work and the ultrasound. The installment of information that had led to Dr. Matsuda's office and the word hepatocellular spoken carefully in a quiet room. The first round of treatment, and the mornings that were hard, and the soup from his mother's recipe, and the old films watched alone in the dark. The reduction that had held. The watchful waiting. The appointments attended by himself, always by himself, in the plastic waiting room chairs with the posters about vitamin D and proper hand washing. He had written about why he had not said anything. Not because he didn't trust Keanu. The letter was specific about this, precise in the way that Solomon was precise about everything he cared about. He had not said anything because saying it to someone who loved him would have made it more real, and he had needed it to not be entirely real for a little while longer. And he had needed the small mercy of a thing existing only inside himself, where he could manage its dimensions, decide each morning how much space to give it. He had written, "I know that is not a good reason. I know it is not even a reason, really. It is just what I did. And I am sorry it kept me from you for as long as it did." The last paragraph said, "You told me once to think about landing. Not the fall, the landing. What comes after? I have been thinking about the fall for 18 months, and I am tired of it. I want to think about landing. I need someone to think about it with me. I have always known that person is you. I am telling you now because I have finally run out of good reasons to wait. And because I think, I hope, that you will still be standing there when I finish saying it." Keanu set the letter down on the kitchen table. Carefully. The way you set something down when you understand its full weight. The kettle began to whistle. Solomon lifted it from the stove and poured the water without turning around. He poured it slowly. The way you do something with your hands. when your hands need something to do. Sul, Keanu said. Yeah. Turn around. Solomon turned around. Keanu was looking at him from across the table. His eyes were bright and full in a way that he was not attempting to conceal or manage. There was no performance in his face, just the open, unguarded expression of a person who has just received something they have been quietly, carefully waiting for, and is not pretending otherwise. You went to every appointment alone, Keanu said. Yeah. For 18 months. Yeah. Keanu was quiet for a moment. He looked at the letter on the table, and then he looked back up. I want to show you something, he said. He picked up his phone. He typed for a moment. He set it face down on the table. I just sent you a contact. Her name is Dr. Priya Shankar. She is a hepatologist at Cedars-Sinai. She is one of the best in the country. I would like you to see her. He paused. Will you? Solomon stared at him. You already had someone in mind, Solomon said slowly. Keanu looked at him steadily. I have had someone in mind, he said, choosing his words with the quiet care of someone telling the truth in full. Since approximately the third time you told me an appointment had gone fine, and I heard the way you said the word fine. The kitchen was absolutely still. Solomon stood holding the kettle. Steam rose from the 2 cups on the counter behind him. You knew, Solomon said. I didn't know, Keanu said, but I knew something, and I knew you would tell me when you were ready. He paused. I'm glad you're ready. Solomon set the kettle down. He stood at the counter for another moment. Then something happened in his face. A slow loosening. A release of something that had been held in careful tension for a very long time. And then he laughed. It started small, almost surprised, and became something larger and less controlled. The specific kind of laugh that lives in the same place as crying, that is made of the same material, that feels like both things at once, and does not apologize for the confusion. He laughed until his eyes were wet. Keanu watched him with a small, warm smile and said nothing, and let him have every second of it. Outside, the December evening was settling over East Hollywood like a dark blue blanket pulled gently over the shoulders of the city. Inside the building, the elevator hummed. Somewhere above them, Rose's lavender moved in the cool air on the roof. A light was on in every occupied window. Solomon wiped his eyes. He picked up both coffee cups from the counter and carried them to the table, and set one in front of Keanu, and held the other in both hands, and sat down. Okay, he said. He said it the way a person says it when they mean something much larger than the word itself. Okay. And that was how it began. Not with a dramatic declaration, or a moment designed for remembering. Just a small word at a kitchen table between 2 men and 2 cups of coffee, and an envelope that had finally been opened after being taped inside a cabinet for 8 months with the words, "Not yet." Soon written on its front in careful handwriting. The yet was over. The soon had arrived. Solomon called Dr. Priya Shankar's office at Cedars-Sinai Medical Center on the Monday morning following that Saturday. The appointment was scheduled for the 2nd week of January, 2023. He did not go alone. Keanu drove. He parked in the Cedars-Sinai structure on George Burns Road and sat in the waiting room while Solomon went in. Not because Solomon needed someone to hold his hand, but because the particular loneliness of a waiting room plastic chair is made measurably smaller when there is a person on the other side of the door who knows where you are and is not going anywhere. Solomon had spent 18 months making that chair lonelier than it needed to be. Not anymore. Dr. Priya Shankar was a woman of quiet, exacting intelligence. She had trained at Johns Hopkins and spent 11 years building a practice at Cedars-Sinai, that had earned her a specific kind of reputation. Not the loud, famous kind, but the kind that lives in the careful recommendations of other doctors who know what they are talking about. She reviewed Solomon's complete case history from Kaiser. She studied his imaging. She ordered new scans with updated protocols. She consulted with her colleagues in oncology and radiology and surgery with the unhurried thoroughness of someone who understands that the difference between a good decision and a right one is often just more information gathered more carefully. She did not rush. Solomon appreciated that more than he could say. In February 2023, the new imaging came back. Dr. Shankar called Solomon at 4:30 on a Wednesday afternoon. He was sitting at his kitchen table. The same window, the same view of the taco stand across the street, and the dry cleaner's lit sign, and Kenmore Avenue moving through its ordinary Wednesday afternoon. The lavender smell from Rose's rooftop garden drifted in through the cracked window, sweet and clean and steady. Dr. Shankar told him that the mass had not remained merely stable. It had reduced, significantly, and beyond what the previous treatment trajectory had predicted, or what the most recent models had projected as a likely outcome at this stage. "This is an excellent result, Mr. Ayres," she said. Her voice was the particular kind of warm that careful doctors allow themselves when the news is genuinely good, and professionalism and feeling are both present at once. "It does not mean we are finished. There is more work ahead, and we will do it properly. But it means we have more paths available to us now than we did 6 months ago. Good paths. Real ones." Solomon sat at the kitchen table. He looked at the cabinet. The envelope was gone from inside it. He had taken it down the morning after giving it to Keanu and put it somewhere else. Not thrown away. Never thrown away. But moved to a drawer where it did not need to be a reminder anymore. And it had done its job. It had carried the words until he was ready to say them out loud, and after that, it was just paper. He called Keanu. "It reduced," Solomon said. She said significantly. The silence on the line lasted longer than 4 seconds this time. It lasted the amount of time it takes for a person to receive something they have been hoping for quietly and steadily for months, without allowing themselves to hope for it too loudly. "Tell me exactly what she said," Keanu said. His voice was low and careful. Solomon told him exactly what she said. Every word of it, the same way he had told him about the eviction notice from a lobby staircase 4 months earlier. All of it in one even stream. Nothing left out. When he finished, Keanu was quiet for a moment. "Soul," he said. "Yeah. You remember what I said to you in 1999, in the gym on Cahuenga?" Solomon closed his eyes. Outside, Kenmore Avenue moved through its Wednesday. A car passed. The taco stand served someone. The dry cleaner's sign hummed. "Don't think about the fall," Solomon said. "Think about the landing." "Yeah," Keanu said softly. "Just that. Just, yeah." Said in the voice of a person for whom the word contains everything that does not fit into any other word. A pause settled between them. Not empty. Full. "I'm thinking about the landing," Solomon said. And he meant it. For the first time in 18 months, he meant it completely, without reservation, without the quiet counter-voice that had been adding but to the end of every hopeful thought for so long he had almost stopped noticing it was there. The but was gone. What was left was the landing. But here is the thing about landings, and they are not the end of the story. They are the moment after the hardest part. The moment where you find out what you are made of, what held, what carried you through the fall and delivered you, still breathing, to solid ground. A landing is not a finish line. It is a beginning wearing different clothes. And this story has been holding something back from you. You felt it from the first chapter. Something running underneath the surface of everything. Underneath the eviction notice and the phone call and the purchase agreement and the letter and the elevator and the mailboxes and the coffee from the Vietnamese place on Fountain Avenue. Something that the story kept circling without naming. A current beneath the current. You noticed the envelope first. Not yet. Soon. 3 words taped inside a kitchen cabinet. You were told to remember it. You remembered it. You noticed the doctor's appointments attended alone. The careful way Solomon said, "Fine." The weight he had been carrying since May of 2021 through 18 months of plastic waiting room chairs and early morning infusion appointments and soup made from his mother's recipe in a dark and quiet apartment. You knew there was something the story had not fully said yet. Here it is. When Solomon received Dr. Shankar's call on that Wednesday afternoon in February 2023 and heard the word significantly, when he hung up and sat at his kitchen table and looked at the cabinet where the envelope used to be, he did something before he called Keanu. He opened the drawer where the envelope now lived. He took it out. He held it in both hands and looked at the front of it. His own handwriting, and the 3 words that had kept him company through the hardest year and a half of his life. Not yet. Soon. He looked at those words for a long moment. Then he did something he had not planned to do and could not entirely explain afterward. He tore the envelope in half. Carefully. Deliberately. Not in anger or relief or drama. Just the clean, certain action of a person putting something down that they have been carrying for long enough. The envelope and the words on its front had been a promise he had made to himself. That he would speak when he was ready. That he would let someone in when the time was right. That the landing was coming even when the fall felt endless. He had kept the promise. He did not need the reminder anymore. He put the 2 halves back in the drawer. He picked up his phone. He called Keanu. And here, right here, is the thing the story has been moving toward from the very first paragraph. The thing that was hidden not in a secret, or a mystery, or a twist, but in the oldest and most ordinary place, that important things are always hidden. It was hidden in plain sight. Gerald Pruitt had evicted Solomon Ayers to make money. What he had actually done, without knowing it, without intending it, without any understanding of the machinery he had set into motion on a Tuesday morning in October with a clipboard and a mustard polo shirt, was force Solomon off a staircase and into a phone call he had been postponing for 18 months. The eviction notice had not just saved Solomon's home. It had cracked open the silence he had been living inside. It had given him a reason, not a good reason, not a chosen reason, no, but a real one, to finally call the one person who had been quietly waiting on the other side of a door Solomon had been too proud and too afraid and too tired to open by himself. Gerald Pruitt had tried to take everything from Solomon Ayers. What he had actually given him was the moment. The moment Solomon stopped thinking about the fall and started thinking about the landing. Los Angeles is a city that forgets. It forgets on purpose, mostly. It tears down what was there before and builds something newer and more expensive in its place, and does not put up a sign explaining what used to stand on that corner or who used to live behind that door. The rents go up. The buildings change hands. The people who made a neighborhood what it is get pushed to its edges and then beyond its edges entirely, and the neighborhood continues without them, wearing a new face, answering to a new name, pretending it was always this way. That is not evil. It is just gravity. The gravity of money in a place where money moves faster than people can hold on. But sometimes Not often, not reliably, not in any way you can count on or plan for. Something pushes back. Something small and specific and stubbornly human plants itself in the path of the gravity and says, "Not this one. Not this building. Not these people. Not today." On a quiet block of Kenmore Avenue, between a taco stand and a dry cleaner that has been there since 1987, a three-story building stands with fresh paint on its walls and proper numbers on its mailboxes, and an elevator that works. Inside it, a woman named Rosa grows tomatoes and lavender on the roof. A man named Miguel rides the elevator sometimes just because he can. See, a woman named Desiree and a man named Thomas are building lives in rooms that were empty before someone decided they deserved to be filled. And on certain Saturday afternoons, a black pickup truck parks around the corner on Rosewood Avenue. A tall man in a gray hoodie carries 2 cups of coffee from the Vietnamese place on Fountain Avenue and buzzes apartment 2B. The buzzer works now. It always gets an answer. A stunt coordinator who once taught a famous man how to fall sits at his kitchen table and drinks his coffee and looks out the window at the city that forgets, and he remembers. He is still here. He is thinking about landing. That is enough. That is everything. Before you go, drop a comment right now and tell me where you are watching this from. I want to know. Or it could be a small town nobody has heard of, or a big city on the other side of the world. Tell me where you are. And if this story moved something inside you, if it reminded you that kindness is real and that the right phone call at the right moment can change everything, hit that like button right now. Not for the algorithm, not for the numbers, but because a story like this deserves to travel. Because somewhere out there is a person who needs to hear it today and does not know it yet. Your like is how it finds them. Subscribe to this channel if you believe the world gets a little better every time we choose to show up for each other. Every single week, we bring you stories exactly like this one. Real, human, and proof that goodness still exists in places you least expect it. And one last thing. And you see that video sitting on your screen right now? Click it. Because if this story got you, that one will too. Solomon made one phone call, and it changed everything. Maybe this video is yours.